bring in for more analysis Andreas Fulda, Senior Fellow at Nottingham University's Asia Research Institute and author of the book, The Struggle for Democracy in Mainland China, Taiwan and Hong Kong. Andreas Fulda, thank you very much for being with us. We heard the Chief of Police there talking from Hong Kong saying, don't pass our bottom line. When he says that, how serious do you think the situation now is for those protesters who are still surrounded?
Well, it's certainly a very serious situation. I think your viewers need to appreciate that the Chinese Communist Party, who is actually calling the shots and not the Hong Kong SAR government, they really cherish the radicalization of the movement because that's what they know they can deal with. And so when officials say, and issue these threats that, the Hong Kongers need to be very careful in what they do next, actually they're just trying to rile up and provoke people. And just over the past 5 months, we've seen that time and time again, when there were opportunities to de-escalate, actually the Hong Kong SAR government, with the tacit support of the central government, has actually always inflamed the situation, and Chief Executive Carrie Lam really has to shoulder the responsibility for this utter mess that Hong Kong is in.
Andreas, we heard Liu Xiaoming, the Chinese ambassador to Britain, saying that Beijing will not tolerate further violence. Do we take that, and I think I'm reading this in between what you're saying, do we take that as a direct threat that China is ready to move in at basically a moment's notice?
Well, you see, Ambassador Liu has gone on the record defending the concentration camps in Xinjiang. He euphemistically called them vocational training centers. Now, we know from the New York Times story that they're anything but. They hold 1.5 million Uyghurs and Kazakhs against their will. And so if a Chinese ambassador to the UK actually says these words, I think everyone needs to be mindful that he is basically towing the party line. He's speaking for Xi Jinping. And yeah, I think it is extremely concerning because Xi Jinping is, as I always say, a Stalinist presiding over a Leninist party state using Maoist tactics. And in the 21st century, I would say that this combination of Stalinism, Leninism, and Maoism really bodes ill, not just for Hong Kong, but also for China.
In terms of what it means for the people who are demonstrating, for the students, for the those who have been peacefully demonstrating, those perhaps who haven't, either way, for those people, though, do you think what they're going to see over the next hours, days, it's basically something that they could live to regret forever if they get through this?
I would always defend the right of people to, protest. Look, they enjoyed, they didn't really have democracy in Hong Kong, but liberalism. And so if you've been used to accessing the internet and having more or less free media, why would you accept any kind of limitations on your free speech or to the freedom of association? It just doesn't make sense. And so for the Hong Kongers to take a stand, I think is quite understandable. I think what matters more now is what the international community will do. For example, we have perhaps the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act passing the Senate today. I think also the British government could do more, or the European Union. They really should actually go beyond this kind of thoughts and prayers and being concerned. I think something slightly more assertive needs to happen also from the side of, as I said, the US, the UK, and the EU.
Is the fact of the matter, though, Andreas Fulda, that no one wants to anger Beijing? There's too much commercial power there. There's too much sway. Basically, the rest of the world is scared to shout at China in case it shouts back.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, basically, in terms of China policy, whether it's here in Britain, in mainland Europe, or in the United States, we basically have two camps. We have the money men who still want to enrich themselves by engaging with mainland China commercially. But increasingly, we do have people who are very concerned about the national security implications. And what I would say, actually, is that mainland China under the Chinese Communist Party really now to the free world is a threat comparable to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But of course, it does have more economic heft. And I think a lot of politicians really don't want to recognize that we have such a big challenge on our hand. But ultimately, more and more people will realize that. And perhaps now with Hong Kong literally going belly up, I think it's very hard to avoid, looking into, this issue and hopefully taking a stand.
Is the West turning a blind eye? Is that the basic way to describe it? The West is choosing not to look, not to act?
Well, look, here in the UK, an election is underway. But I think that cannot be an excuse for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, or the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, or any other politician to just ignore what's happening in Hong Kong. We haven't seen any of the major leaders of the British Party saying anything. And this is in the United Kingdom, basically the country that signed the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration, which is a legally binding treaty. And of course, the British government has a responsibility to now call out the Chinese Communist Party for being in violation of that international binding treaty. So I think it is really shameful that none of these politicians have spoken up, and that shows you, how distracted they are with the election, but also, of course, with the Brexit process.
Indeed, and the other politicians all around the world, though, distracted by perhaps that other issue, which is more commercially driven. Andreas Fulda, we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis. Andreas Fulda, Senior Fellow at Nottingham University's Asia Research Institute and author of the book, The Struggle for Democracy in Mainland China, Taiwan and Hong Kong.